Hello and welcome back. Hey, so many of you have asked for this, and I have finally decided to deliver. We are going to be talking about Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, the final section of the book, part 8 in this series. And there's not a whole lot to talk about here because this is really the summation and the call to action portion of. So when you if you've studied argumentative essays, right, you want to finish with a call to action, right? That conclusion is summarizing, it's the call to action. And pages 119 through the rest of the novel, of the book, are just that. But there are some important things that Coates touches on in this final section that have to do with our discussion about the comparison between the world and me and between souls of black folks, and those three areas: the veil, right, that wall that's separating black and white culture; dual consciousness, so living in two worlds when you are a black person; and the negro problem, quote unquote, as it is seen through the eyes of white people, of what to do with black people now, in an economic sense. So if you go to page 120, this first section at the end is talking about his travels to Paris, and what is remarkable about this is that the veil as it exists in American society is not there in French society, right? He keeps talking about that, how he keeps having these feelings that he needs to be more guarded, that he needs to be aware that at any point something is going to go wrong, but it's just not there. And the interesting thing is that this idea of the veil is completely created by white American culture. That this is something that it exists in other countries. There are other racial divides between citizens, but in terms of Coates, and what he's talking about, this only exists in America because it was created by white culture. And no matter how far away you get from it, both metaphorically and literally, right? I mean, he gets on a plane and travels across the Atlantic Ocean. So physically he gets away from it, but metaphorically he's away from it in terms of there just not being that veil in French society. No matter how far you get away from it, having grown up in it and experienced it, you can't get away from it, is what he's saying. So, and it's like talked about in Souls of Black Folk, excuse me, in that, no matter how close you can get to that veil and see the other side, there's still that veil there. So it's almost an inverse, right? In Souls of Black Folk, he gets right, you can get right up to that veil, you can see the other side, and you feel like you can touch it and live there, but it's still there. Whereas here, it's the opposite. He gets away from it and sees, ironically, what is on the other side, but it's always still there. Um, Talking about dual consciousness, on page 125, he talks about this specifically about the old code. So his mother warning him that at some point his son was going to test him, right? To stand up to him and try to become the alpha in the house. You're not the father, I'm the father, type of thing. And he talks about how he needed training in order to not believe that his wife had to teach him how to love him and how to kiss him and talk tenderly to him, right? And again, like the veil, these generations, this generational, this constant oppression, it 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 programmed him in a certain way that even with all this training, he still can't help but feel it, right? He says on 120, 126, I could not shake the old ways, the instinct to watch my back at every pass and always be ready to go, right? No matter how safe he feels, no matter how he talks about too how lonely he feels, he the oppression by white American society has completely altered who he is, and it's so ingrained that he can't escape from it, right? So if we think about the veil again, you are trapped in it, right? It's not a veil surrounding white society, it's a veil surrounding black society. And no matter where you go or what you do, if you grew up, if you were part of the group in the veil, you are always in the veil. No matter what happens, it is always there. And that is a damning accusation towards white American culture. And it's true. And this is what really the rest of the book is about. But before we get to the very final section, pages 127, that final paragraph on 127 to the break in 129 is really devastating, right? The talking about how how that those black kids growing up not feeling the weight of the veil because their parents and their microcultures have tried to cultivate this feeling of safety, this feeling that everything is okay, that you can, the rest of the world is not like this type of thing. Always have to remember that it's still there. Whether we want to believe it or not, all of these ideas we've been talking about throughout this book exist, right? Just because we don't want to believe in something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so it's a devastating warning to not only his son and his readers, but it's a reminder to, those of us who do not live in that veil, that this is still a reality to those who live within the veil. The last section, 131 to 132, he also touches on the Negro problem again. That idea that, well, now that blacks have freedom after the Civil War, what do we do with them? They're an economic burden. Well, he flips that idea on its head and says, no. Black people are not an economic burden. They've been a boon for white culture. And you think about like the prison pipeline, right? The school to prison pipeline. You think about just the economics of, recently, I don't know how timely this will be in years to come, but the defund the police movement. There is so much money put into law enforcement and imprisonment, right? And things created to control the black problem, the Negro problem, that it has become its own. So it's become the new slavery, right? He says, in America, black bodies are a natural resource of incomparable value, right? People are making millions upon millions of dollars on the persecution, prosecution, and imprisonment of black people, right? What does it say? When 8% of the world's prisoners are black men, our bodies have refinanced the dream of being white. So just because slavery doesn't exist anymore doesn't mean it doesn't exist anymore, right? It's just changed. And so the final section, section 3, where he visits the mother of Prince Jones and then reflects on that. This is the bigger call to action, right? And this, he not only talks about the persecution from white society, how white society created the veil, they created I'm going to stop saying they. We created the veil, right? Because I am white, so I'm going to put myself in this too. We created the veil. We created the Negro problem. And thus we created for black society dual consciousness. What world do I live in? And here is where he specifically starts to address those who are living in that dual consciousness world. He calls them the dreamers, the people who believe that if they just act more white, they can be accepted as white, right? So what needs to happen, or what his warning is, that we are destroying ourselves. We are giving ourselves over to this society that is never going to accept us unless there's a fundamental shift in white culture, right? White culture has to change. And you see it now. Again, I don't know how timely this will be in years, but all the protesting, all the movement, everything that is happening in our current 2020 national climate, NBA players wearing messages on their backs, football players with it on the back of their helmets, things like that. This is we are in a state where no matter what happens with the push from Black society, unless white society accepts it, nothing's going to change. It's just a weather out the storm, send more police, right? Distract people. Here's another industry that uses Black bodies as currency. Restart basketball, restart football. And I am being hypocritical because I love sports and I love watching it, but the exploitation and endangering of Black people for white society pleasure, right? So let's give them other things to think about. Don't pay attention to that. That doesn't mean anything. The only thing that's meaningful is look at the shiny bell in front of me, is what white society does. And we have done that, since 1642. Ignore that shiny bell right here. This is more important. Pay attention to this. Don't worry what I'm doing behind me. And that he is making that plea to his own people. Don't buy into that. We have to keep loving ourselves for who we are. He says on page 151, struggle for the warmth of the Mecca. Struggle for your grandmother and grandfather for your name, but do not struggle for the dreamers. Hope for them, pray for them if you are moved, but do not in your struggle on their conversion. The dreamers will have to learn to struggle themselves, to understand that the field for their dreams, the stage where they have painted themselves white, is the deathbed of us all, right? Black people, any culture, should not have to whitewash themselves in order to feel safe and valued in our culture. And that is what he is saying. Don't do it, right? Yes, we need to struggle. Yes, and this struggle is always going to be there, right? But do it because of the history. And eventually, something's got to change. At some point, there has to be a breaking point. And that's what he's saying, right? And he talks about in this last section how, Prince Jones had everything. His mother was a professor. He was well educated. He went, to university. He was a quote unquote good Negro, right? And even he was subject to police violence. And he was still executed for a perceived offense against white society. And so he says in the end, he's driving and he says, through the windshield, I saw the mark of these ghettos, the abundance of beauty shops, churches, liquor stores, and crumbling housing, and I felt the old fear. Through the windshield, I saw the rain coming down in sheets. So a physical veil, right? If you've ever driven through a rainstorm, right, it's like a veil. You can't quite see. You can kind of see what's on the other side, but it's obscure. It's hard to really picture and make out, but you can see it there. And he says this struggle is going to continue. And this book was written, 2014 or 15, I forget. And it's true. Like I said before, we are having demonstrations and protests. There's still police violence going on. There's still unequal representation of all cultures in our politics, on our televisions, on our movie screens. All of this inequality still exists. Ferguson was 8 years ago. you think something would have changed. That's a long time, right? Think back to 8 years ago. What were you doing? What was I? I was in a totally different job at that point. And now here we are. Same old situation. And the only way that's going to change is the continued struggle of those within the veil and a complete and fundamental shift in mindset and belief by those of us who are not in that veil. All right, there we go. For those of you who have been pining for years and years, some of you, for this video, there it is. I know for those of you who are like a year or two ago asked me for this, it's too late. But for those of you who are finishing things before school starts this year, there you go. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching all my videos and commenting and liking. If there are any other books that you want some help with, I am here to help. So send me a comment, send me a message, let me know what book it is. I will do my best to get that done while I do it for my current classes. Thank you very much. Have a great day.